Medusa is one of those names that arrives already loaded. Snakes for hair, a stare that turns you to stone, a hero holding her severed head like a trophy. But if you step back and ask a simple question, who was she before she became a warning sign? The story splits into multiple ancient versions that don't fully agree with each other. In some of the earliest Greek sources, Medusa is not introduced as a wronged woman. She is introduced as a Gorgon, one of three sisters born to sea deities Phorcys and Ceto. Two are immortal. Medusa alone is mortal. That mortality isolates her immediately. Even among monsters, Medusa is the one who can die. And that changes the whole emotional balance of the myth. She is terrifying, yet already marked for an ending. She is not only a threat in the story, she is the one Gorgon the story can afford to lose. That detail matters because it's the narrative key that makes her killable and makes Perseus's quest possible. In Hesiod's Theogony, Medusa's story is stark and mythic, not psychological. Poseidon lies with her in a meadow, and later, when Perseus cuts off her head, two beings spring from her: Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysaor, a warrior figure. It is strange, sudden, almost biological, life erupting from death, mythic consequences bursting out of a single violent act. So in that early framework, Medusa reads less like a person in the modern sense and more like a force of the world. Dangerous, fated, embedded in a cosmic family tree. Monster first, tragedy second, if tragedy is even the right word. That is why the earliest Medusa feels so distant from modern sympathy. The poem is not really asking how she feels. It is not searching for her inner pain. It is not pausing over her suffering or inviting us to do the same. Instead, it is asking where she belongs in the structure of the world, what kind of being she is, what place she occupies inside the old cosmic order, and once that has been named, what must follow from it. In that older register, Medusa is less a wounded individual than a dangerous fact of reality, less a private sorrow than an ancient presence the world already contains, something lethal, fated, and woven into the design of things. Then you meet Perseus. In the myth tradition summarized by sources like Pseudo-Apollodorus, Perseus is sent to retrieve Medusa's head, often because King Polydectes wants Perseus out of the way. The mission is basically a death sentence, until the gods interfere. Perseus receives the tools that turn impossibility into a solvable problem: guidance, weapons, and, most crucially, a reflective surface so he can approach Medusa without meeting her gaze directly. And notice what that means symbolically. Medusa's power is not defeated by strength. It's defeated by indirection, by refusing direct eye contact, by turning the encounter into a trick of angles. Even in death, her power remains active. The head is carried as an object that still petrifies. That detail matters more than it first appears. Perseus does not overpower Medusa in a fair encounter. He wins by refusing the terms of her power. He survives by never truly meeting her. So the myth turns sight itself into a battlefield, not strength against strength, but vision against vision. So far, monster fits, deadly gaze, divine quest, heroic victory. But then comes the version most people now associate with Medusa's origin, and it is not Greek at all, but Roman and much later. In Ovid's Metamorphoses, Perseus is asked why Medusa has snakes for hair, and Perseus answers with a story. Medusa was once beautiful, admired, so admired that Poseidon desired her. In Ovid's telling, Poseidon violates her in Minerva's temple, and Minerva, Athena, responds by transforming Medusa's hair into snakes. This is the turning point where the question monster or victim becomes unavoidable. Because in Ovid's frame, Medusa is not born monstrous, she is made monstrous. And not as punishment for violence committed by her, but for violence committed against her. That detail is exactly why modern retellings often describe her as a symbol of injustice, someone punished for surviving, then hunted for what she was turned into. What Ovid changes is not just the plot. He changes where the moral shock of the story lives. In the older Greek frame, the drama is the hero's feat. In Ovid, the drama becomes the origin of the wound. That is why later audiences remember Medusa differently. They are no longer asking only what she is, they are asking what happened to her. But it's important to be precise. The Medusa as wronged maiden transformed by Athena backstory is not the only ancient version, and it is not the earliest one. Earlier Greek sources emphasize her as the mortal Gorgon and focus on Perseus's feat. Ovid adds the moral shock and the transformation narrative that reframes her as victim. So which is she? If you stay inside the myths themselves, the honest answer is both, depending on which tradition you're reading. Medusa can be the monstrous boundary marker of the ancient world, the thing you do not look at, the threat that turns living people into stone. That is one reason Medusa keeps returning in later culture. She does not stay locked inside a single mythic function. She can mean danger. She can mean violated power. She can mean rage turned into image. And that instability may be the real source of her power. No single reading can contain her for long. She can also be the figure whose story exposes how power works, how gods commit violence and institutions respond by controlling the victim's body, then calling that control justice. And then there's the final paradox, maybe the most revealing one. After Perseus kills her, Athena takes Medusa's head and places it on her aegis, an emblem that terrifies enemies and protects the bearer. In other words, Medusa becomes a weapon for the very divine order that destroyed her. Or, in older frames, she becomes a protective symbol carved on shields and temples, meant to ward off harm. That's why her image survives everywhere, not only as horror, but as protection. Not only as punishment, but as power. That protective role is older and stranger than it sounds. The monstrous face does not only repel, it guards. The same image that freezes the living is placed on armor, temples, and sacred objects to ward off harm. So Medusa does not disappear when she is defeated. She becomes part of the system that uses fear as defense. So, Medusa, monster, victim, or both? If you want a single sentence that can hold the full mythic tension, it might be this. Medusa is what happens when a story can't decide whether to fear a woman's power or explain where that power came from, so it does both and calls the result a monster.